two big lessons I learned there. When I was head of the Medical Education Convention Services Department, I was really doing well. And the Vice President of North American Sales, so he's responsible for Canada, Mexico, and the United States, came into my office and he said, I want you to be head of Canada for us. I want you to move to Toronto and run our Canadian division, right? That sounds good, doesn't it? I was like, oh yeah, I've been wanting this job. I went to Europe, I did that job for 2.5 years, and finally I'm going to get to run a country. I was going to get to have like HR, finance, sales, marketing for Canada, regulatory people that did all that. I was going to run a company, basically. A small company within a big company. So it was like my dream job. And the guy says to me, so I want you to fly up with me. We're going to have a sales meeting in Toronto. I want you to fly up to Toronto with me and we're going to make the announcement. Well, you can imagine everybody in Canada is not going to be that thrilled about a guy from the United States coming up there to run their country. And they think, oh, he's going to be here for 2 or 3 years and then he's going to go back to the home office, so on and so forth. So he says to me, we need to keep this a secret between you and I until this right opportunity comes for us to go to Toronto and do that, right? And he says it'll be in a couple of weeks. All right, no big deal, no big deal. Just tell my wife, just tell my mom, just a few people, right? So a month goes by, no trip to Canada scheduled yet. I've negotiated my pay raise, 37% increase in pay. Not bad, eh? 37% increase in pay. I've got to put my house on the market. My wife has to quit her job, right? So we started house shopping online, looking at all the Toronto neighborhoods and getting ourselves familiar. Then another month goes by. I've signed the contract. I've got my pay raise. It's just a matter of me moving to Toronto with this announcement being made. No announcement. Nothing comes. Another month goes by. Still nothing. And my company used to then have a ski meeting for surgeons out in Colorado. And a lot of Canadians would come to this ski meeting. And I knew 15, 20 surgeons in Canada. I was good friends with some of them. So during the ski meeting, I was talking to a couple of doctors, one from Toronto and another one from London, Ontario. And guess what I told them? Just a matter of time, it's inevitable that I'm going to be coming to Canada. This is just between you and I, right? It's just, can't tell anybody. So guess what they did first thing when they got back to Canada? This is big news in Canada, right? New head of Canada. They told their sales representative, first day in the operating room, right? Making their decision. Hey, did I tell you I ran into Vance Clement at the ski meeting? He tells me he's going to be your boss, right? What? In 3-4 hours, the entire Canadian organization knows that I'm coming to Canada and it hasn't been announced by my boss. Right? So guess what happened? I never moved to Canada. I never got that opportunity. I never got that 37% raise. There's no way to get it back. As you've heard the saying, loose lips sink ships. That's where this comes from. So don't learn that lesson the way I did. Confidentiality is incredibly important, personally and for your company. It's incredibly important. That's one of the mistakes I made. That's one of the mistakes in my career. It seems simple.
What advice do you have for the kids leaving college, getting that first job? You have a lot of later career advice, but that first job, what do you see would help these students stand out from their?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when I graduated in 1992, that was the last recession until this one. So George Bush Sr. was the president at the time, and the economy was in the tank. It was the Cold War. I'll tell you what I did was, and I graduated with a low GPA. That did not help. Obviously, every time somebody wanted to ask me for my grades, I'd be like, great, this was a smart one. But I got the Arkansas Industrial Development Commission. They print out a book every year, and it lists every factory here in the state of Arkansas that has all the number of employees. And you got to know, well, a factory that has 20 employees probably doesn't have an industrial engineering staff. So I looked for any factory that had over 300 employees, and I got on the phone every day. And I got up every morning and put on a pair of khakis and a dress shirt, and I was ready to go on an interview. And I would call HR, I would say, do you have anything, and so on and so forth. And I would get some interviews that day. I'd say, I can be there in an hour. And and I'd get in the car and I'd drive to Conway, or I would get in the car and drive to Russellville. And it was amazing how many job interviews I got just by hustling. It was all about hustling. And the way I got my job eventually was a newspaper ad. Not many people get their job, but I answered an ad in the Gazette for Wright Medical Technology in Little Rock, and moved to Memphis, and that's how I got my first job, was out of the newspaper. But my piece of advice to get you prepared so you can get the first job is, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but nobody told me that it would be good to have a lot of knowledge in one particular industry. And my advice to you is, for example, if you like medicine and you're interested in biomedical engineering, if you have to write a paper, or write a paper about contact lenses, you know, and how they're made, if you have to do that. Or if you have to give a speech about something, or write about artificial heart valves, or the FDA, or whatever. But whatever class you're in, you can always connect it back somehow to that industry that you want to work in later. So that's my advice to you. And that way, when you go on a job interview, and it's with Bosch and Long, or it's with Smith and Nephew, and they ask you questions, you have this wealth of, you've become an expert in a way about medical devices or the medical sector, as opposed to if you had written about poultry science and you wrote about contact lenses, and then you wrote about, you know, washers and dryers, whatever, or toasters or robotics or whatever it is. You're all over the board, right? You lack focus in a way, and you're not going to get a job.